Hello everyone, welcome to GGN. Today is August 13th, 2012, and I'm Darko. This first article I have up, and the news I'll be covering in this first video will be the Middle East, a little bit of Asia, and even a tiny bit of Venezuela news. So this first article I have up is all about Al-Qaeda, because the mainstream media is just now admitting that Al-Qaeda is over there and basically is the bulk of the, quote, peaceful activists that are basically executing civilians and wreaking havoc over there. So it says here, Al-Qaeda flags fly over rebel-held Syria. So there's been some small stir in American media as media organizations from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, to the AP have finally gotten around to acknowledging a, quote, presence of Al-Qaeda and like-minded jihadist groups among the Syrian rebel forces seeking to topple the government of al-Assad. So the writers of the Asian Times go on to say, it's difficult to see what the cause of the excitement really is. After all, such a presence has been blindingly obvious for months, whether as a result of the dozens of suicide attacks that have plagued Syria or the numerous videos that have emerged showing rebel forces or supporters proudly displaying the distinctive black flag of Al-Qaeda. So many of you probably remember this same thing happening in Libya with the Al-Qaeda flag flying high. But observations made by a German journalist during a recent visit to rebel-controlled towns near Aleppo suggested that there's no mere presence of jihadists. It says here that the real question is whether there's a presence of anything else. The report, which appeared in the leading German newspapers and sources, also provides evidence that rebel authorities are subjecting civilians to arbitrary detention and torture, and summarily executing captured members of the regular Syrian armed forces. So you can go through and check out the rest of this article. It goes through some of the incidences that are going on over there where the people are literally scared shitless. Like this one guy who had a tattoo, who is a supporter of Assad, and basically it was cut off with a razor blade, and he said that he did it himself. And basically these guys are being rounded up in these large classrooms and basically tortured and abused until basically they throw support for the Free Syrian Army. So links will be posted in YouTube's video description. Go check them out. Next up, we have UN designates Free Syrian Army affiliates as Al-Qaeda. So US, UK, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey stand accused of state sponsorship of terrorism. UN failure to enforce own resolutions will resign their legitimacy and necessitate their expedient removal and replacement with a multipolar system. So I don't know if you remember me covering this before, but it means that the US, UK, NATO, and the Gulf states of Saudi Arabia and Qatar are knowingly and willfully funding, arming, and politically backing designated affiliates of Al-Qaeda, contrary not only to the US and British anti-terror legislation, but contrary to numerous UN resolutions as well. Turkey's support for anti-Syria terrorism to backfire. They had an interview Press TV did with Mohammed Marandi, professor at the University of Tehran, he said, where they discussed the role of the U.S. Arab-Turkish triangle in arming and supporting Al-Qaeda armed gangs in Syria. He says obviously the media has been completely one-sided. He says not only is it the mainstream press, but also online and more investigative websites. But then a pattern emerged. He said every time there would be a UN meeting on Syria, there would be a massacre the day before, which worked very, very well and was very convenient for the so-called rebels. So the fact that the Western media would immediately blame the Syrian government created this atmosphere where extremists could carry out atrocities and know that the blame would be pinned on the government. So it's not only the Western media that's completely biased and providing a one-sided story, but they're also helping atrocities being carried out by blaming the Syrian government for things they have no information about, and for basically keeping silent about atrocities carried out by the opponents of the government. So in summary, he says basically it, or Turkey's support of Al-Qaeda, will most probably backfire. This is my website. If you're new to GGN, it's ggnonline.com, and on YouTube my channel is ddarko2012, and ddarko2013 is my backup channel. You can subscribe there, or if you'd like to help me out, you can donate via PayPal right there. And lastly, you can follow the website by email by putting in your email address right there. Okay, so Syrian rebels claim shootdown of fighter jet and government disputes the report. Rebel fighters said Monday that they had shot down a MiG-23 jet in eastern Syria and captured the pilot, a claim disputed by the Syrian government, which blamed a technical failure for the crash. So we know that intelligence agencies are arming and equipping these rebels. And it says here, if the rebel assertion is verified, the action would represent a significant improvement in military skills demonstrated by the ragtag fighters, and could be a sign that they are receiving more sophisticated weapons from the international sponsors of terrorism, is basically what it is, which now include Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Not now, they've always, so they're just now, the mainstream media has no other choice but to admit this, just like that the fact that Al-Qaeda is operating in Syria. But just like the downing of the Turkish jet, who really knows, right? You don't really know. I mean, even Turkey said that it didn't even look like it was shot down by the Syrians. So then we have, oh yeah, and the pilots. Remember the pilots? They went missing for a long time. And it says here, tunnel full of weapons discovered in Syria capital. So it says here, Syrian security forces have discovered a tunnel under a house in the capital of Damascus with large amounts of weapons and ammunition stored inside. The Israeli-made bombs, night vision goggles, sophisticated telecommunications equipment, and a satellite sender were among the things confiscated. So the Syrian troops also discovered documents detailing insurgents' planned attacks on strategic locations. Stolen medicines were also found in the tunnel. Then on to sanctions. U.S. slaps new sanctions on Syria, extends those against Hezbollah. The U.S. has announced new sanctions Friday against Syria and its supporters, focusing on Hezbollah's support for the regime, for the government, and a Syrian oil company for violating U.S. sanctions on Iran. So they said here they sanctioned the refiner Citral for selling $36 million of gasoline to Iran in April. So, you know, they're basically associating these guys with terrorists. Israel right now is trying to get them declared as a terrorist group, Hezbollah. And so they mention that, but what they don't mention is there's actually entire countries and big companies and businesses that have been doing deals or conducting business with Syria and the Syrian government for years. And all of a sudden they're supposed to act as if, these guys are the devil. And they're not supposed to do business with them because God tells them not to. So, and I think you know who I'm talking about when I say God. It says here, U.S. plans to arm Syrian insurgents with missiles, says report. So we're just talking about this, right? This sophisticated weapons, and then we come across this, which is they're getting armed with freaking missiles. So we have here the mission of the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in a visit to Turkey was to supply the Syrian insurgents with anti-aircraft equipment and missiles. So while in Istanbul on Saturday, Clinton said Washington will hasten the end of the Assad regime. The NBC News reported on July 31st that nearly 24 man-pads or man-portable air defense systems have been delivered to the insurgents in Syria by Turkey. And then this individual says we need to take joint efforts to prevent a power vacuum from being formed. I believe they're talking about Kurdistan or the Kurds and stuff like that. And as a listener pointed out, which is a very good point, is the opium trade. So, you know, it could be a decent amount of this has to do with opium, which Turkey had they were a big player, and then it kind of moved north to Afghanistan. So maybe they want to get back in the business. But either way, they were saying that, and I read about it afterwards, that area, Turkey and north of Turkey, and that is basically a corridor for opium. From all the opium that gets produced, from the poppy fields to the opium trade, opium that goes to Europe. So, I mean, when it's all said and done, it's always about business, right? CIA allegedly overseeing arms into Syria. Syrian opposition officials say that the CIA is controlling the weapons flown to Syrian insurgents. Says not one bullet enters Syria without U.S. approval. Syrian opposition speaking in Istanbul told the Austrian newspaper. Remember, they were just crying. They were literally crying, saying that the U.S. is leaving them out to dry. They're basically not helping them enough. Okay, so here you go. The Americans want the rebellion to continue, the terrorists to continue, but they're not allowing enough supplies in to make Damascus regime fall. And then we have the Syrian opposition leader calling for a no-fly zone. So this is not really a big surprise here. So the president of the Syrian National Council sounds very official, doesn't it? And remember I said I believe this is actually based in Turkey. Says here that such a move by the international community would show Assad's regime that his opponents around the world are serious. So that's what I'm talking about when I say God. Basically, the Zionist occupied countries. So, And they're calling for a no-fly zone. So former Secretary of Defense says the U.S. will probably enforce a no-fly zone and take aggressive action over Syria. So that was William Cohen, former Defense Secretary. So yeah, more visible U.S. role expected in Syria in coming weeks, says Turkey. That could include a no-fly zone along Syria's borders. So they're expecting a post-Assad government, or Syria, talking about getting the regime change that we've been covering here for months now. Turkey and U.S. to create Syria task force, so a post-Assad Syria task force. Yeah, so Turkey and U.S. agreed to accelerate preparations for the fall of Syria's President Assad, creating a formal bilateral team to manage helping the opposition, providing aid to fleeing refugees, and planning for worst-case outcomes that include chemical weapons attack. Talking about Turkey and Kurdistan, Kurdish spring looming over Near East, so independent Kurdistan won't consider Ankara, Baghdad, or Damascus. It has everything it needs, the oil, the key advantage in the Near East. So maybe that's what it has to do with. They're removing the troops in Afghanistan, and maybe they're just going to shift their drug operations southwards, or towards Turkey and that. But who knows? Like I said, who really knows? Qatar offered Syrian ambassador $5.8 million for defection, says report. That's right. Says here they offered Syrian counterpart an advance payment of $1 million and a monthly salary of $20,000 over 20 years, trying to convince a diplomat to defect and voice support for the opposition. So, man, that's a big bank right there. Remember, Syrian Prime Minister Defection, another PR stunt. He was only in office since June 2012 for a couple months. And this is just another sign or indicator of the big illusion that's going on in the media as far as the coverage goes. Foreign-backed armed groups targeting Syrian history as it happened in Iraq. So that's right, large medieval fortified place in the center of old city of Aleppo. It is considered to be one of the oldest and largest castles in the world. That's right, when I looked at Aleppo, when it first started breaking out, it's one of the oldest cities in the world. Use of the Citadel Hill dates back to at least the middle of the 3rd millennium BC. So a lot of history there. Massive looting of ancient artifacts underway in Libya. So they happened in Libya, Iraq, now Syria. Don't forget Egypt confirms looting, vandalism, and other antiquity sites. I think I even read something about the Muslims, or not Muslims, but just radical Islamists calling for blowing up the pyramids or some crazy stuff. U.S. Navy ship collides with oil tanker in Gulf. So like many of the comments says, how the hell does this happen? Because it's in the Strait of Hormuz, so it probably was meant to happen. They don't make mistakes like this. Like one of the guys said, 2 golden rules. You don't drift on the bottom, you don't hit bottom, and you don't hit another boat. So, how the heck does something with all this sophisticated technology and stuff like that I just ram into another boat? Well, it's good. It's good for the economy. It's good for business to drive up oil prices even further, right? Just like the recent Iranians that went down in the water that were, quote, saved by the Americans. Oh, they never said how that fire was started, right? So it says here, Iran government criticized over earthquake response. So of all people, the United States is going to go ahead and criticize Iran for their response, basically turn a blind eye to the biggest thing, which is Katrina. So Iran's government faced criticism on Monday over its response to 2 earthquakes that killed 306 people, with complaints of lack of tents. So I know there's usually seismic activity over in Iran, but you have to remember HAARP and earthquake-type weapons, weather weapons. Iranians are donating blood to earthquake victims, so it says they're coming out in thousands to donate blood for earthquake victims. And Iran was also one of the biggest donators to the Haiti earthquake victims and Japanese earthquake victims, sending shipment after shipment. I think they sent like 20 shipments. Iran drought, part of soft war by West. So yeah, they actually believe that the drought that's in Iran is being caused by the West influencing the climate. So Iran knows what's going on. Israel's Netanyahu attempts to shame UN. Saw no reason to visit a country whose government is anti-Semitic and openly declares its intention to destroy Israel. This is after Netanyahu expressed disappointment that Ban Ki-moon and the UN would be attending the conference. But Iran is very anti-Semitic, although they never said that they were going to blow up the state of Israel. They just said that it's an illegitimate state. And they also hold the 3rd largest Jewish population besides Israel and the United States. Jews are protected in the Iranian constitution, and seat is reserved for a Jew in the Majlis. So Iran hosts the largest Jewish population of any Muslim majority country. So Israelis are protesting against a possible military strike on Iran. And under Israeli orders, the United States warns Europe to prepare for terrorist attacks by the Iranian-backed Hezbollah. So Israel's top court basically pushes forward West Bank village demolition. An Israeli sniper gets 45 days after shooting 2 Gaza women carrying a white flag. Hoorah.